there are so many women. I just share this with you, and it's such a frightening statistic. I read just recently that the average woman in South Africa has more chance of being raped than learning to read. And I think that we should just remember our sisters who are not here. But having said that, each and every one of us has the power to do something to empower other women. And we've got a lot of wonderful women here, all of you. In fact, when Debbie said that, we have to be a little bit flexible, any one of you could be up here and have a story to tell. The difficulty is telling your story.
But it was always about writing. It was always about making sense of where I was, and this is where writing took off. I went into a sociology degree, published works from then onwards. I present a course on the work that I've published. And so that was really the turning point. It was really about a long-term release of writing energy that became something more constructive, and that drives me today. And that's really what it was about. And as a compulsive person, I've also reached out into very many avenues, constantly restless. I think restlessness is important. Especially as women, we're taught to think about how we present ourselves. Presentation of self is so important, but that restlessness exists, and it's that very restlessness, whether I've delved into the corporate world, whether I've delved into the architectural and design world, or as a gender theorist in the academy, these things have come together to formulate who I am, and it's very much about both driving the process and being thirsty about driving that process. Very much about that.
Was there a lot of support along the way? Again, going back to what Putty was saying, that her parents, poured their purses into her education. Did you feel that there were people behind you saying, yes, you should do this, what about that? Did you have a lot of advice, or were you working on your own?
I go a lot by gut feeling. My parents always wanted me to become a doctor. So when I said architecture, they were like, I was going to be the family guitarist. Speaking of which, I would love to play the guitar the way it was played at the previous session. Oh my gosh, that's one thing I've yet to learn. So in terms of that, it was always about the self-preservation of family. How are you going to support yourself? And I've become the family artist, musician. With much support from within the family, but I've also delved into topics that are not discussed about. I look at issues that are not discussed, that are kept under the table. And it's those very challenges, when my book is flashed around in traditionalist aspects of society as something that should not be read for fear of subversion, that's my challenge, because the book no longer belongs to me. It's really about standing behind what I represent in those topics. And so that's really been the challenge and part of the growth aspect. It's not about, oh my gosh, I don't want to see, I want to sit under a rock, I don't want to see another person. How dare the media write this? How dare the community media see me in this way, construct me in this way? But suddenly it's about standing up and saying, this is what I believe in.
Have you ever had, it doesn't seem as if it would be the case, but have you ever had self-doubts? Do you have issues of confidence and issues of, but is this the right thing?
Oh, absolutely. I think that when you're challenged, the first question that comes to mind is, am I the right person for this job? It suddenly seems like such a big thing. And it also does come down to, when you say you need something to believe in, it's really about, do I believe in me? Do I believe in my voice? Is it important to get my voice heard? Because my voice suddenly represents a relative majority of gendered voice.
What have been the challenges, and what have made you realize that this is not going the way that you wanted it to go, whether they're your own stumbling blocks or those that have been put in front of you?
The only stumbling block that I've faced is personal doubt. And I still, sometimes it's still, you still sort of come across these hurdles in your path where you sit back and think, I really believe in the path that I've set out, but there's still something there. And something that Stacey said in a conversation a few minutes ago is, self-awareness is very, very important in order to be self-worthy. And so the constant reflective process is important. Every day, even if you clinch a deal and you cross the threshold of your home and you get home and you sit down tired because you've had to work twice as hard to get the deal, you're sitting back and taking it personally when in fact we don't easily celebrate our successes as women. And that's important. Self-acknowledgement is important. And I'm not going on an egotistical diatribe. I'm saying acknowledge the little successes that you make along the way. Acknowledge those successes and then move ahead. Women are nurturers. Women have the creative potential. But women fall short on self-acknowledgement. Just to yourself, sit down and say, I did this today.
Okay, turning point for you. You started as a trainee manager at McDonald's. Before that, what did you have in mind when you were a kid? What did you have in mind that you wanted to be?
Ironically, at the age of about 5, I was having a conversation with one of my primary teachers, and the request was, so if you had, who would you want to be if you're in the future? And I said, an air hostess on SAA, which was quite funny. But what I didn't realize is that from a very early age, I connected with serving others. The second trigger point for me was having a conversation with a secondary educator, and he said to me, it's you in Standard 8, you need to start thinking about your future. What is the career that you want to pursue? I said to him, I've never thought about what my career would be. I have had conversations with my parents, and coming from a very poor environment, it was quite clear that it was important for my family to need me to actually complete matric, but then to find employment. So being a resource of income for the family was my family's expectation for me. So that was really the first hint of discomfort, where I was in conflict with what was important to my family, because I value family, but at the same time, what could have been important to me. But in the dialogue with the tertiary educator, it was interesting that he said to me, this is the potential that I see in you. And I think the way that you could serve your family better is to pursue your potential and then still ultimately be able to provide a source of income for them. And in that moment of sort of self-doubt, I processed the conversation, and then when he pushed me hard enough, I was actually able to declare to him that actually I want to be a powerful businesswoman. I had no idea what that looked like. I had no idea I was going to get there. I had no tertiary source of income for tertiary education, but he actually walked the path with me up to the point where I was applied and became a student at the University of the Western Cape, to the point where he walked with me to do the administration. And at that point, he said to me, I've taken you to this point, now the journey, you've got to take the journey from here on.
Wow, that's really quite a story. I mean, wonderful that you had that sort of support. You wanted to be a powerful businesswoman. Already I'm hearing the word ambition, and we've been told that we're not good at being ambitious. People sort of say, oh, no, but what was the Heidi Howard story? You know, she's Heidi, ooh, she's ambitious. Has that been a problem? Have you felt that people have felt a little bit, women in particular, have felt a little bit hostile to you because you've been ambitious? And do you feel yourself to be ambitious?
I feel myself to be ambitious, but prior to even joining McDonald's, I worked in 2 other organizations, and what was interesting is it wasn't the women that felt threatened by my ambition in the previous organizations. Interestingly enough for me, which was a very early learning, was the men were more in discomfort about the fact that I was vocal about what I wanted. And I was quite naive, not understanding corporate politics, that if I reflect back, 1993 wasn't necessarily a time where women in the environments that I was exposed to were very vocal about that, especially to males, because all my previous bosses were all male, and currently still are. So,
what about role models? I mean, you say that you wanted to be a powerful businesswoman, but you had no idea what that looked like or who that looked like. And when you watch the television, when you read the papers, or even people in your community, were there any people who you thought, that's her, that's where I want to go?
I think where my eyes opened to that was really more in the McDonald's environment. So very early in joining the organization, there was the director of operations, Janet Hayes Brown. It was interesting watching her in motion. And at literally within less than a year of being within the organization, I had said to myself, that's who I will be. I'm clear, I can do what she does. Yes, there's the characters are slightly different, but I'm comfortable with who I am, but that's what I'm going after. And it's interesting, I met her 2 months ago, or last month at the convention in the US, and it was interesting just that connection, that the clarity of, I'm here now, and what I had thought was an impossible actually came to life.
You're here now, you sort of arrived, you've got a title, and here you are, and we're listening to what you've got to say. Stumbling blocks for you, either, we were listening to Shafinaz's personal stumbling blocks, any that are personal, any that are societal, that have been put upon you that keep you back?
Not necessarily stumbling blocks, I think to a certain extent challenges. So being a mother and accepting the fact that I cannot remove who I am when I come into the work environment. So understanding that when I come into the work environment, I'm still a wife, I'm still a mother of 4 sons, and I've got a role to play. But when I'm in the work environment, the role I play is the businesswoman. And outside of the working environment or the social environment, I'm a sister, I'm a mother, so the roles I play in the different environments can sometimes be in conflict. But I found that even just joining the organization, I was already married. I had a 3-month-old son. So my family environment involved as my career involved. Something that I've heard a couple of times, stumbling blocks for me was self-doubt, so belief in yourself. But the self-doubt was very much driven by the comparison I made with my male counterparts. The male counterparts were not going through all that, weren't analyzing it, I think, to that level. Where for me, I would feel that, if I'm going to be successful, do I need to mimic my male counterpart? So self-doubt was one of them. The other thing was the element of complacency and not wanting to take risk. So for example, I'll give an example in McDonald's, it took them 3 years to negotiate with me to actually just get me to relocate from Cape Town to Johannesburg. And so for me, it was a big risk that I wasn't prepared to take because I wanted to have a safe bet. And the safe bet was the family environment, the structure that existed in Cape Town, I couldn't duplicate in Johannesburg. And I had to evolve from thinking about how I couldn't do it to what I needed to do to be able to do it. And so taking myself out of that comfort zone and almost evolving to a process of what I very often reflect on as being positive discomfort. Because unless I was in positive discomfort, things were not in motion, and I couldn't see myself grow within the organization.
Whoa, I'm just thinking about those 4 sons. Did everybody get that? 4 sons and all this too. And having to talk to the 4 sons, and presumably the 4 sons' father, to persuade them that it was a good idea to come to Johannesburg. And I mean, I'm just not loving that conversation. I can imagine that in itself is a challenge. Anne, where are we going to start with you? Because it feels like that you've been doing what you do for so long. You're empowering so many other people. You're placing so many other people. And yet you yourself, if we can prevail upon you to tell us your story. At what point in your life, like Joanne, it was less about getting a career, more about getting a job. Did you have a career in mind from the beginning?
I think to answer your question, I'm actually an adopted child. I think I got really lucky and I got adopted into a stunning family of amazing role models in many ways. And I think growing up with cousins and aunts and uncles and my own parents and late grandmother, who were all remarkable career women. I think at a very young age I decided, in fact the standard was set, it was you will go on and be successful. I think I was a bit of a challenge to my mother in the sense that I really loved dancing. I was on the stage from the age of 3. I got a standing ovation on Durban City Hall stage at the age of 3, and I thought, gee, I quite like that. So I think dancing was really kind of high up on my agenda, but I think my mother certainly and my late grandmother had other plans for me. So it was really about go off to university, get qualified, get educated. And I think a part of me has always been a bit of a rebel. That's probably why I am an entrepreneur. And I failed first year famously. Whatever I did really well. So I got a symphony of Fs in my first year. And then I got a great wake-up call. I thought, I better take this a little more seriously, and happy to say I did. I went on and did quite well. But I think at a young age it was really about, there was a standard set. I think also the other thing that really influenced me, I came from a very highly educated family. My mother was a lecturer in medical education. A lot of lecturers know you don't get paid that well. But I think also having cousins and again, very successful people around me, and my parents really battled to give me a good quality private school education, and I think we had a lot of financial challenges in our home, and I decided at a young age I was going to be financially very successful and be able to change that pattern.
So one of the things that you do, and I think it's a very important thing, so I really would like to touch on it, is that you are very pro-women. You're a member of the International Women's Forum. This question, and I will ask all of you, this question of, is it incumbent on every woman to do something to help other women? We hear it again and again. I always think it's so unfair. I'm sure men don't think, gee, I've got to help the boys out there. And yet the women sort of feel, I have to help the women, necessarily because of how things are. Was that something that you decided, made a positive decision on, or did it just happen?
I think it's a combination. I think, and we've touched on the issue of self-awareness. I think as we reflect on our own journey in life, anybody who has those moments of reflection, we all realize that we have been helped along the way. And I know I have been tremendously helped by men and women in my life. I was privileged enough to be accepted into Unilever as part of their graduate recruitment program. I really came up through the marketing ranks of Lever Brothers. And I had tremendous men and women who really helped me. And I think in those moments of reflection, it's almost like, I've been supported along this journey. And so there is a sense of, I really want to give back. I really want to help others along with me. One thing, Nancy, I think men do help each other. I don't think this is only a woman thing. We talk about the Old Boys Club, and as much as it's at times in South Africa, it's not only in South Africa, I think globally, it often comes across as us and them, the Old Boys Club and what women need to do. I think we need to get past those sort of divides in a way. I think it's more about inclusiveness. I think men do give back, and many men have given back to me. And I think if you pause and reflect, I think many men have given back to you in your own life. Yeah.
It's true. It's absolutely true. And I always hate the idea of men bashing, but the thing is that women have got so much further to go. There's so much more work to be done. And I suppose it's the reason why women have formalized it, like the McDonald's initiative for women, the Women's Leadership Network, and your own International Women's Forum. But on the subject of men, maybe not on the subject of men, I don't want to get too personal anyway, but on the subject of challenges, have there been any challenges? And you can see that I'm making the reference. Have you had any difficulties with being a woman sort of rising through the ranks? But I don't want that to be, I don't want to, put that in the pathway necessarily. Your personal stumbling blocks that have come from wherever they've come from or from within have been what?
Good question. I think one of the biggest challenges has come from within. I think we all grew up with our own limiting fears, beliefs, judgments, resentments, expectations. And I think my own real growth has been from developing my own life skills around emotional and spiritual intelligence, and reaching a point of knowing that these are things that are often, they are our own stumbling blocks. So I think my own life skills have really helped me know that I can do and achieve and be whatever I want to be. And I fundamentally believe that. I think some of the other challenges, I think in this gender journey, and there is a gender journey, I mean the stats speak to it, only 7% of all CEOs of listed companies in South Africa are women, et cetera, et cetera. And, but I think one of the challenges that I think many women have faced, and I think that was also a growth for me, is that we try and emulate men. One of the biggest gifts I got was reaching a point of, hey, my femininity is such competitive advantage. Let me use it. Mamela Pratt, we're a top-end global headhunting search company. We did the first qualitative research in the country on women on boards. What are the issues, what are the gaps, and how do women and corporates close those gaps? And I personally did all those interviews with a sample of men and women. And I think what really came out very strongly is that as women, we do have unique qualities and competencies that really enhance board decision making. We need to appreciate our femininity, we need to understand what that uniqueness is, and we need to bring that to the fore in a way that we're proud of it. And I think the other caveat is not to say, well, we just bring the soft touch. We need to understand that any boardroom or any business needs hard skills as well. So I think the other thing, which in a way was, I did go back and brush up those sort of commerce degrees and subjects that I'd failed, and really develop my financial literacy. And I think it is about blending the hard and the soft skills.
Okay, I want to come back to this thing about women. Shafinaz, for you, women are very much a focus for you. But have you made a conscious decision to do something to help other women in either professionally, on a personal level? Is it something you feel you want to do, have to do, need to do?
Absolutely that, because I think that to stay on a theoretical level doesn't actually create waves and make changes. And it's also about challenging how many aspects of your life you can actually get fully involved in. So on the one hand, I've set up a publishing company that publishes women's voices. This was set up in 2009, and it actually sets out, on the one hand, workshops that get women writing, get women telling their stories, the idea of carrying those stories forward and putting them into a validation vehicle in the form of published works. These works are obviously distributed around the world. And the other thing is, 4 years ago, I got involved in a project management of setting up structures around the country that actually develop rural women. I sit on the board of an investment trust called Wiphold, that some of you might have heard of, and that's actually sending out and creating prototypes for allowing women who owned land to re-establish and re-engage that land in agricultural or whatever basis.
Is it something that you feel you have to do, want to do, need to do, and do you do supporting women or helping women in your personal life as well?
So for me, I felt that just looking back at the organization, more than 50% of our employment complement are females. But not everybody's driven. Everybody's waiting for HR to design the strategy. Everybody's waiting for HR to say, we've identified Nancy as the next director of operations. And so for me, I felt that the organization was in limbo because the women were hoping that somebody would identify them. And so as part of the network, it was to make them understand, you've got to elevate the significant contribution you're making to the organization, because that is a competitive advantage for us in the future. And for me, just trying to drive some form of differentiation to make it clear to them, hope was not a strategy. And if you think that you are locked into a glass ceiling, that glass ceiling is sitting in your head. So we've had the Global Diversity Officer, Pat Harris. She's written a book called None of Us is as Good as All of Us. And the one thing that stood out in that book for me is a comment around sticky floors. And the comment around sticky floors literally says that there is no glass ceiling, or I'm uncertain as to whether or not the glass ceiling exists. But what I can tell you, there's sticky floors. And a lot of women get trapped onto the sticky floors and cannot advance their career. So for me, that became a personal ambition that I'm obviously fortunate enough to be able to contribute in the context of work. And then at a global level, I sit on a steering committee for the Asia, Middle East, Africa, Pacific region for McDonald's. And it's interesting, if we think the challenges we're facing in South Africa are unique, try and find, out of an employment complement of 7,000 people in Japan, you'll have 3 vice presidents, of which 1 is female, and in an HR role. So there the mission would be that women are not just good in the soft skills similar to what Anne had referred to, but we do have business competencies. So making sure that when we identify female leaders, it might be a blend of having the soft skills, but having a core competency where the men can actually see you can make a difference as well.
It's always good to hear how we compare to elsewhere in the world. You know, there are so many down statistics about women in South Africa. It's good to hear some up ones as well. The sticky floor. And I can't help, I'm just wondering what solvent you use to remove women from the sticky floor that lifts them up.
Men.
Oh, okay. And also, is it, 2 questions here, sorry, but you know, what's the solvent that gets them off that spot? But also, are we not as women hardwired to be a little bit, not me, I'll just wait till somebody notices me. And how are we to change our biological makeup when after all these millennia, that's how it's been? Sorry, that's such a big one. You can go with the solvent first.
The solvent was the men, because I did find that men have become, for myself, if I reflect on my own career, they've become the advocates for me. And I think you mentioned earlier, you spoke about challenges. When I reflect on my own challenges, I also found because they were my advocates, they were leading me. Where the transition of leading them and having to follow you is I had to leverage that advocacy relationship. So for me, it was a challenge that when the organization started pushing me faster in my mind, because you go through that self-doubt. You know that you want to be the director of operations for McDonald's and it's a 5-year journey. But you do get to the point where you have the self-doubt, you do have the advocates, but the advocates you've got to prepare when you go into the transition of now having to lead them. So for me, that sort of, in a metaphoric term, was a part of what a sticky floor was for me, and what was probably the catalyst of me saying it's not the glass ceiling. I've got to break through on my own thinking, but I had to leverage my relationships within the organization. And I had to be visible. Because believe it or not, coming through the organization, I had bottlenecks where I had become invisible. Because I got to a point where my work will speak for itself. And I realized that your business result is not good enough. It is the chat between the lift and the coffee, because I couldn't walk into the men's room. I thought of it, but I didn't walk into the men's room. So for me, it was leveraging the passageway, connecting with leadership and saying, hey, by the way, come to my restaurants. I want to show you this, but we'll do it over a coffee chat. So always being an opportunist and saying, finding the moment, because I was clear, I didn't want to be a man.
It's all those sort of cunning sort of strategies, isn't it? I'm going to think twice about getting out of the lift and where you go and what can happen in between. What about you answering the big question? And, you know, the fact that women are, maybe they are, maybe they're not, but traditionally they have been sort of hardwired to take a back seat, a supportive role, etc., etc. Are we ever going to change that? And do we want to change it? If we really want to be where we want to be, we're going to have to change it. What do you think?
Thanks, Nancy. I love the quote by Mahatma Gandhi that says, be the change you want to see in the world. And I think it's quite a complex issue, and I think it's quite delicate. But I think one of the concepts that always stood out for me at school studying biology was the whole issue of the balance of nature. And I think this is about balance. So I think if we have that combination of saying, use our femininity, embrace it, celebrate it. You know, a lot of women, and when I interview them, you know, they say, I don't like politics. You know, I'm not a politician. I don't want to play the politics of the corridors. The truth is, if men are out there playing rugby, if we are sitting there playing cricket, we are going to get a bloody nose very quickly in that scrum. So I think it's be the change we want to be. I think it is about learning about the rules of rugby. And what are those rules? I think it's about political astuteness. I think it is about, as Joanne said, personal marketing. How do you position yourself in the organization? I think it is about being proactive, about having a career strategy. I'm always amazed, and I interview a lot of top executives in this country, how many of those people, men and women, are very adept at developing and implementing strategy in their business role, and yet they don't have a personal career strategy. So I think take that seriously. A little tip, and it's a discipline I have for myself. Every year, and as an entrepreneur, I have that luxury to have a lot of leave at the end of the year. I spend 2 weeks on a beach somewhere before I come home, and I write my life plan and strategy. And it's a personal plan, and it embraces all aspects of my life, my career, my family, my friends, my partner, my finances. And I think just focusing that, pause, reflect, focus it, and take it as seriously as your career strategy, but integrate it.
I think that if I've taken home one tip, that's it. 2 weeks on a beach with a little notebook, and I'm going to put out the whole plan. But that feeds very well into my next question, which is sort of, there are two questions, and I did promise we'd talk about the work-life balance, and this could keep us here all day. But there are two parts of the question. And one is the work-home balance, which is how do you handle looking after the family and how do you handle work. But the other side is how do you handle all the aspects of you? Say that it was just you, the guitar, the painting, the drawing, or spiritual self, all those things. So, Shafinaz, let's start with you. Let's start with the work-home bit first. How do you cope with that? Are you coping with it? And have you consciously coped with it? Do you have a plan?
I don't have children, so work-home is rather individualistic, but the constant family challenges that might require your energy or your time. And it really is about setting those boundaries for yourself, me time, whether it's about productive me time or just sort of letting go time. And I found it very interesting that, goal setting and orientation is extremely important, as well as reflection. There's a lot of reflection in the way, I really admire Joanne for the way that you reflect on your processes. So there's a lot of learning going across and something to be taken out of, both in terms of goal setting, reflective, self-awareness, and that personal growth that extends you through the process.
Do they feed into each other? I'm just thinking of you with the guitar. I don't know about your spiritual self. Do you find that you talk about boundaries? Do you keep them all separate little portfolios, or do they bleed into one another?
I use the guitar reference as a metaphor, but I'd love to learn. I think that we wear many caps as women, as men, and yes, they do blend into each other. And it's also a way of saying, you know what, we're capable of more. It's about getting rid of that glass ceiling that Joanne spoke about. It's really about challenging yourself beyond the is that is in front of you and going beyond that.
You were talking about admiring Joanne's reflection and reflective process. For you, perhaps that comes in writing, because that seems to be your tool.
Not just writing. As an identity theorist, a lot of my work focuses on reflexivity, the idea of autonomy in your life and in your space, the idea of both visibility and voice. So it is about letting, not just understanding what you want, but about voicing it, putting it out there, creating that awareness that others might be able to identify with. So for me, reflexivity comes across in many aspects of work, and it immediately jumps up at me, as something very powerful to work with, as an energy in many respects.
I think we all do tend to sort of run along where you actually do have to stop, whether it's on the beach or wherever it may be. For you, Joanne, let's go to you next, the work-life balance. These 4 boys of yours, how do you cope? The face says it all.
So I think the challenge for me is the word balance, because it's not balanced. There are days where it's I look at my 3-month schedule, and it's 70% work and it's 30% home. So for me, the way I've conceptualized it for my family is the concept of harmony. Because I've realized I wasn't getting this balance thing right. So the harmony I've sort of instilled in my life is making sure I've got a nanny that can take care of my kids when they get home from school. Making sure that, my husband, believe it or not, is probably the stabilizer for me, because he's comfortable doing things that my society would have probably expected me to be doing. And so he plays that role very often, because sometimes I'm 2 weeks away, I'm out of the country. So he plays that role, and it helps me feel in harmony. The one commitment I have made with my children is anything that is of critical importance to them, I would prioritize that event. So even if it means saying, sorry, McDonald's, I cannot go to Japan. I will stay at home because my son has got a rap session at Wits. I'll attend the rap session at Wits. So I'll adjust my schedule, and I've realized that in that way, educating my kids at a very young age is that you are a priority. I do love you. Being present all the time does not mean that you're spending quality time with me. So making sure that the time I spend with the 4 boys, because they range from 2-year-old, 6-year-old, 10-year-old, 17-year-old, and so they're all at very diverse stages in their lives, and then I've got a 45-year-old. So at very diverse stages in their lives, understanding that as I've pathed out my career, similar to what Putti said, is I realized I couldn't separate Joanne from the different roles. So I was quite clear to make sure that if career is a priority being a mother, what would show to my family that they're still a priority. So for my kids, it's those special events, making it clear, my boy, if you need me to be there on this day, sounds horrible, but you got to schedule the time. So declare to me. So the first thing they'll do is they'll have notes piled up, on the dining room table. So when I walk in, remember you've got to do this. Mommy, you got to do this. So they start becoming my personal organizer for my personal life. It's soccer on a Saturday, so it's up at 8. You sit on the soccer field. I go through those events with them to show that as much as my work is an important attribute, they are equally important in my life. I think the challenge, though, is then saying, balancing the me time, as you said. So selfishly having a PVR and saying, at 4 a.m. I might be watching The Good Wife, for example. Silly things such as telling my husband, today we're leaving the kids with a nanny, we're going to have coffee at maybe in McDonald's because I want to follow up on something else, but having a cup of coffee in a McCafe. So strategic in thinking of, I need to do this because I've got to collect that, but hubby, come on man, I'll treat you. Come to McDonald's. So finding different ways to connect with my husband on a one-on-one, I found brought harmony because it was equally important for him to know that he is, the number one male in the house as well.
I just have to share with this Sue Grant Marshall, who I think may be talking at some stage down here. I remember I worked with her many years ago at Fair Lady, and she came to the office once and she said, I'm worried. My 4-year-old said, Mummy, can we have a meeting? And I think it is something that one has to sort of, keep a bit of a balance there. I'm not going to even ask you about the me time because it sounds like, aside from having the odd cup of coffee, there's not a whole lot of me time, but maybe a little bit when the soccer's finished. What about you, Anne? What about work-life balance? Work-life, home-life, work balance, and then the whole Anne balance. How do you get that all together?
Yeah, I think, and Joanne alluded to it, I think people often, it's how we frame balance. I think so often we think balance is every day I need to have quality time at the office and quality time at home. I think Joanne's made some wonderful practical suggestions, and I think balance is different. I mean, as an entrepreneur starting off, and if you look at the stats of how many entrepreneurs fail, for the first couple of years, I probably worked 80, 85-hour weeks. But for me, balance was a different thing. I think it's about how do we find ways to reward ourselves and our family and those near and dear in a way that's relevant to them and to ourselves. So my reward was, I've worked like a Trojan horse this entire year, but I'm going to take 6 weeks off at the end of the year when South Africa's on holiday. And I'm going to travel parts of Asia, and that was my reward. So that was my balance. People said, Anne, you don't have a balanced life. I said, I have a great balanced life. I'm doing stuff that's really important to me. And so I think we can frame it differently. I have a suggestion for you, Jan. I think McDonald's should build a wonderful bedroom with all the sexy ambiance. And so when those husbands come in for a coffee, you've got some added advantage there. But I think, playroom for the children. I think it's how we frame balance. I think that shifted for me over time. As my strategy lecturer at business school, Nick Benadal, always used to say, strategy and how we do this is about incremental strategy. And I think what looks like balance at the beginning of an entrepreneurship venture or at the start of a new job, it's always more pressured. I think as that evolves, then there are different ways we can find those important moments to spend quality time with people in our lives and with ourselves. I think regarding ourselves, and I think self-awareness comes with that. There are times when I just know, and I have an amazing team of people around me, our head of ops and research. There are days when I say to Colleen, I'm really burnt out. You're not going to hear from me today. Don't call me. I'll call you. And I take the day off. And I give it to my team as well. I can feel when they're there and they need it. And I say, you know what, this is your day. Take your boys to the Spur, do whatever. So I think it's about being creative, innovative, flexible, and I think it's about awareness of when we need to take time out.